All right, welcome back. Sorry about that. I'm not exactly sure what happened, to be honest. One minute I was live, and next minute it was flashing at me and then shutting down. And I thought maybe it was because I was connected to Facebook, but that's weird because I don't know how it's set up. That it should be filtering through YouTube and then into Facebook, but whatever. We're back now, hopefully everybody can see me and hear me. For those that were here before, thank you for coming back, and thank you for having patience with me and bearing with me as I get this thing set up. 100-yard alchemist, welcome, man, welcome. And little seasoned minister, welcome. Yeah, we are all back, absolutely. So I'm going to pick up where I left off, but to kind of recap for a moment, what we've done so far with this series is what I've been trying to do basically is help people understand the scripture from a more common sense perspective, not just a common sense perspective, but seeing it and reading it the way it tells you to read it, which it tells us line upon line, precept upon precept. What this simply means is this right here. Oh, let me get that back out of here. So we're up in here. That's not what I want to show right yet. Close that. Where is my window? All right, I guess I got to add a display. See if I can find. That's not what I want. Well, everything just keeps moving around on me. It's odd. This is very odd. I had this thing set up to show. It is in. Hold on. Maybe I put it somewhere else. It legit died. It went away. I'm pulling this tablet back up. It's not going to get rid of me. That they're not getting. Oh, there we go. Aha. Ah, there it is. There it is. Okay. I had to find it. Now that I've found it line upon line, precept upon precept. When reading scripture, it's the same principle as reading a timeline. As we work through this timeline, make sure I'm not. I do need a new filter. Okay. As we make it through this timeline, you would start at year one being the year that Adam left the Garden of Eden. Now, it's really important to understand that the Garden of Eden would not have come out of that garden and been 1 year old or 1 day old or anywhere close to that. He wouldn't have been 2 or 3 actual days old. He would have been several thousand years old by the time he come out of the Garden of Eden. He was created on the 6th day. You have the 7th day, and then they get kicked out on the 8th day. That's 2 days. That's a 2,000 years. He was in the garden 2,000 years when he came out of the garden. And in that time, while he was in the garden, he didn't have to worry about shelter, food, going to the grocery store, or anything like that, like we do today. However, that's what really bothered him when he got kicked out, was the idea and the notion that he was going to have to work the land, and the land was like barren, almost like desolate. It wasn't populated the way that you would think the earth would be populated. At least that's how it's described. Point I'm trying to make with all of that is that in these bloodlines, you have, this is the line of Adam, and then it goes to Seth, and then from Seth all the way to Abraham, and so on. Well, the thing is, you also have another line, and on that other line, it's known as Cain, and Cain has a line that's similar to Adam's line. Cain's line is very similar, and Cain's line, the way it works is his names, their names of their lineage kind of mirror this. They mirror these names. So you'll have an Enoch over here just the same as you have an Enoch over here in Adam's line. The issue isn't that they have the same name. It's that people today look at names as differently than the way they looked at names back then. These names had a meaning, so that's why they were named that, because they represented their name. It made it to where you didn't have to lie about who you were. I mean, you really couldn't lie about who you were. So as we go through this, these people pass on, they die. Here you have Adam. He dies at 930 30 years old. I wrote 31. I don't know why, but it's 930. And then Seth dies in the year 1040. Oh, I wrote that's the year that he would have died, 931. Not that he was 930. And then as this goes on, we notice that these names here after the flood, their lines get shorter. Now, I had to expand this to be able to fit a lot of these people in here. But if I broke this part here down that is below this thick red line, if I took all these people and I moved them up here, what would end up happening is these people, their lines would look like this. they would be really short. I mean, they wouldn't have any link to them. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because this here is damn near 1,000 years. Each one of these is about 900 years, with the exception of Enoch. Enoch only had this little blue line of 365 years. His 365 years, and then he goes to heaven. However he gets there and however that process takes place, it's really not known to any of us. However, if you delve into the books like Enoch, the apocryphal books, what you find is that there was a whole lot going on with Enoch. In fact, Enoch is described as the first scribe, meaning he's the first person to write a book or anything of that nature. He's the grandfather of Noah right here, as you can see. You have Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. One thing a lot of people don't know about Enoch is that he ruled the entire world. Let's see. Just to help make this a little bit clearer, in one of my later videos, one of my lesser elegant ones, I was trying to describe how the earth works. In this image here, I kind of just drew a fake earth. This is not accurate necessarily, but it's pretty close. I was just messing around. I did this on my lunch break. But what I want to point out with this image here is this circle right here. This big picture represents yours and my world, except that we are confined to this circular area. Now, there's no physical dome that comes up over from these outer rings that we know of as the ice walls. There's no actual dome that comes up over us like that. What it is somewhere in the center here, there's this mountainous magnet, but it's not just the only one. There's 12 of them, and 12 of these mountains are actually trees. They go all the way around this thing. Let me get back to this. All right. The point I'm trying to make is that this magnet that's in the center of our world right here, it creates this Coriolis effect. It does this thing right here. And somehow this magnetic vortex that's going on creates this icy cold barrier, and that's what forms the ice wall. The dome itself, though, the actual firmament over our world, is way out here. It's this big place way out here. And this dome goes over around this big world right here and meets at the top like this. And then we're a small little, basically like a electronic or electromagnetic something or another dome inside of a actual firmament glass type dome. It's the reason why you'll see certain rockets and stuff when they go up into space. Some of them look like they're going through water, but then yet some of them crash. I'm not sure how they're getting through this part here, like, and out to here, but somehow they're able to do it. But we as a species of people are the only people that are actually able to leave out of here as far as I know. But there are, yes, there's 12 gates. You're right about the 12 gates. There's 4 gates around us, though. And these 4 gates are openings within that ice wall. You can just simply take a boat through there if the government would let you. But there are actual 12 gates around this outer ring, this outer wall. Now, what's out here is anyone's guess, to be honest. But if I'm being extra honest, there's enough world inside of here for all of us. There's a lot of world out here that's just as that. I mean, that's a lot for us to deal with. What's out here in this wide area? I mean, I don't necessarily think it even matters to us, or it even should matter. Nor do we possibly even want to know. There's probably a very good reason why there's a bubble or a dome over us. Regardless if it's just to keep the waters out or not, there's other reasons, I'm sure. But also, the point I wanted to make with this here is that you see all this blue in here. Now, we call this oceans and we call this seas. All this blue out here didn't used to be there. This world used to be this. 4 big, giant balls of land. Of course, I didn't draw that very good at all. But this world was basically why am I doing that? This was basically our world at one point. It was these 4 quarters. And right now, we only exist in this 1 quarter of the actual world that we live in. This four quarters is not where we come from. All this used to be one big giant piece of land with four rivers that ran through it. For some reason, people will take two little bitty rivers right here, and they'll say, oh, that's the Tigris and Euphrates, and that's right there by this body of water, so that must be that. That must be where we are. I mean, it looks like it. I mean, that's what people will end up saying with that. The point is, the real rivers are way out here. I mean, they're not even in our little area. They're on the outside of it, perhaps. Exactly. No oceans until the flood. The flood is what created a lot of this, though. A lot of people in the Little Season community, as they research and discover the evidences of the millennial kingdom, they may assume that the events of the loosing of Satan are what led to the breakup of our land masses the way they are broken up today. The problem is, a lot of this happened as a result of the flood. It says that waters burst out of the ground, and so you could imagine if there was a piece of land right here, and then a bunch of water come bursting up out of the ground right here. Not only are you going to have a cavity, a hole, where once this water stops bursting, not only will you have a hole, but you got to do something with the dirt. I know that firsthand. Today, I was digging a deep hole to try to find a leak. I think we ended up digging 5 foot deep, about 8 foot long, 3 foot wide. We were using high pressure water to break up the ground. It would create like a slurry, muddy slur. And then we would take a big vacuum hose that would pull all that mud and water out of the ground. If I didn't do that, then eventually what would happen is that mud would dry out, but you would still have a hole there, a cavity. I mean, it would be sunk in. It would be like an impression, a huge impression. Kind of like, oh man, let me see if I can find that. Kind of like this, when you're looking at, this thing doesn't like my help. So like when you're looking at this, oh man, rasterize. So right here is a crater. Now, each one of these craters on the moon can be matched with a corresponding crater on Earth. It's why you can see them so clearly. But this isn't necessarily a meteor. This is where water, I don't know why it won't let me. It's where water had burst out. Now, what ends up happening is the land gets reshaped around these craters. We go back. Let's see. I don't want to save any of that, so let me go back here. So the flood. But what I'm saying is basically is that the flood created a lot of this space. However, a lot of these lands, especially in our little area that we dwell in, these lands got moved around, though. These lands got moved out of their positions. We know that from Revelation 20, where it talks about the lands being moved away at the loosing of Satan at the end of the millennial reign. The 1,000 years had ended. Some of the lands got moved around. Jason Jack did a really good video on this. His only thing that I have an issue with is him not understanding necessarily that Pangea is still there. Pangea is not this. This that we live on, these 7 continents, are not Pangea. Okay? These are not Pangea. This did not break up from this over here. This is Pangea. Pangea is still there today. We just can't get there because of this ice wall and the governments that won't let you pass through it. Why they won't let us pass through this, I have no clue. As far as you and I are concerned, there could be other worlds with ice walls, with people and civilizations going through the same garbage that we're going through. But you wouldn't know that there's anyone out here, just the same as you didn't know that there was an ice wall out here till a couple years ago, or that the earth was even flat till a couple years ago. But these people out here are possibly going through the same nonsense that we're going through in our little world over here. Now, whether they are or not, it would make sense to assume that there could be other places, civilizations, or groups of people living here that all converge together at the camp of the saints to circle Jesus and the saints, which lie at the camp of the saints, which is said to be right under Sirius, or the North Star. So Sirius would be essentially right here. Let's make this a little clearer. Sirius would be here if you were looking at this from the top, which is why it's always like that whenever, depending on where you're from looking at it through a telescope or something. Everybody kind of faces this same angle, pointing to the north here, which is really odd how this works, this whole magnet thing works, or magnetized mountains. They call it Rupus Nigra, or the Black Mountain, which essentially was just a tree. Polaris is the North Star. That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. No, absolutely, John. You're right. No, I'm not. No, I wasn't saying Jason Jack was wrong. I said he did a good presentation. I'm saying that he's not understanding that Pangea though is still there. That's all I was pointing out about that. But the rest of that really doesn't really matter, because you're right. He was correct in his explanation of all of this. Though, but more south. Yeah, yes, that's right. So you notice this area here, this would represents Africa, and you can see the tip of it is in the south, yet it does point to the north, which would be the center. The center would be like the north, and then this would be south. But for whatever reason, our sun and moon operate and move in this fashion around this circle, this small circle right here. So our east and west is like this, and our north and south is a little different. We have a north here, but some people's north does point that way out here. It depends on what instrument you're using. It's really difficult to deceive everybody on every level, but it's not difficult to deceive people on different levels. And that's what's been done here with this genealogy. Now, all this is important to show here is that people don't necessarily come from the lands that they think they come from. They don't necessarily come from any of these lands. They come from people. Everybody comes from people. Now, let me get back to this. What I'm showing here is that this is solely the bloodline of Shem. I don't have Ham on here, and I don't have Japheth on here. And the reason I don't have either one of these two people on here is because these two guys, their seed died. It was exterminated. The reason their seed is gone and exterminated is because of where is he? Jacob, Joseph, Moses. Let me see. Here we go. So after the flood, after Noah dies, after Ru dies, Serug, Terah, Arphaxad being the last of the big people, Jacob and Esau were born. And then Esau, he ends up moving into the north only after to go and then also dominate the south. In the north, his people ended up defeating, or it says that they subdued all the sons of Japheth. What this mean, and he does the same thing with in the south with Ham's line. Let me erase all that. What Esau does is he ends up getting rid of Japheth and Ham's line by putting the seed of the male into the womb of their women. What this ends up causing is it causes all of these people who come from the line of Shem, all of these people here end up looking very similar to these people here. So now what ends up happening through the seed of, let's see, erase all that. Through the seed of Abram, when he becomes Abraham, his son, his lineage, Esau, brings all the people of Japheth and Ham into the line of Shem. This is important to understand because that's what they're talking about in the New Testament when they say that all nations will be made as one. And then when God tells Abraham that all nations will be blessed through his seed, all nations. So the point that should draw up in your mind is that nations are groups of people that individually do come from someone in this line. Now, the interesting thing about the bloodline stuff and the whole race narrative is that a lot of people don't understand some things here. So Abraham ends up having a son, Ishmael, Isaac, and then Isaac. All right. After Isaac, Isaac ends up having Jacob and Esau. After Jacob and Esau, you get all the way down to Joseph. Once we get to Joseph, Joseph is only one person. He's one from the line of Judah. And he's one person, okay? And not all 12. He's one of that makes 12. He's one of 12. One of 12. There's 12 other bloodlines that come from Jacob, not just the line of Joseph. However, through the line of Joseph, we get King David. And King David, everyone knows, comes from, everybody knows that King David comes from hold on, let me find it. Let me move this out of the way. Everybody knows that Jesus comes from King David. That's what I was trying to say, actually. So let me pull this back up. All right, let me get rid of that. Let me find my other page. All right. But the ones that were exterminated happened to be Lot's daughter's children. Okay, yeah. So I haven't even gotten into that line yet with this, but yeah, no, their line gets taken out as well, because they weren't. Their line does get taken out, completely taken out. But hold on, let me pull up what I was trying to pull up. What? Where? All right. First Samuel. That's right. I had to find it. I had to find it in my notes. 16:12. Okay. So I'm pulling that up, but I'm actually gonna pull up something else. So in what ends up happening, oh, that's not right. Why is this doing this? All right, here we go. I'm just typing that in because it's gonna bring up the first. I like when people have these conversations. So you get videos like this.
Black people are the original Jews. It's crucial to delve into the complex layers of historical, genetic, and cultural evidence that underpin this claim. Centuries of suppression and misinterpretation have veiled a truth that proponents argue deserves closer scrutiny and acknowledgement.
Okay, so I'm pausing that because that's not really important what all they have to say about this. Now, I'm not saying that to take away from the black community. I love the black community. Don't get me wrong. This has nothing to do with race or hate towards any other community. What I'm pointing out with this video in particular is that the fact that it's talking about current day people who kind of look like the people they're talking about and describing, and they're trying to tell you that you are a certain group of people and that all of you come from that singular bloodline that we were just looking at. Now, the reason they will say that and the reason why they'll cling to that is because of who King David is, all right? Not just because of who King David is, but because also who Jesus is. In Revelation, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up before I'll show you that other part. In Revelation 1, it's talking about, it kind of gives you a description of Jesus. It says that, where is it? Yeah. It says his head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were as a flame of fire. Now, none of us have eyes that are as a flame of fire, at least not that I've seen, unless they're talking about blue, like as in fire being blue, the flame, blue flame. So when I read that the first time, that was the thought that came into my head. But I was also in my head convinced that Jesus had to be black too, because that's all I'm hearing about is that he was black. But I'm not sure that he was necessarily white or black. The reason I say that is it says his feet are into like fine brass, and as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. So his feet are like brass, and then brass is kind of like a golden brownish color. It's a tint of brown, basically. So he's kind of like a dark brown skinned guy with blue eyes, or maybe he has golden eyes, fiery eyes. But regardless, the point is they'll see that white as snow or white like wool, and people will cling to this word wool. And they associate this with this phrase with, oh, his hair was like wool. It doesn't say that his hair was like wool. His hair was white like wool. They could have used any fabric, but wool was probably the fabric that they used most commonly with clothing. So that's why they were using that phrase in that way. But more importantly, white like wool, doesn't necessarily tell me that his hair was woolly, yet it could have been. It really could have been, but that's neither here nor there. The point that I'm making with that is that this right here is telling you that his hair was white. That's all it's telling you. And as white as snow. White like wool and white like snow. White as snow. And his eyes were as a flame of fire. But his feet were like unto brass, as if they burned in a furnace. Now, burned brass does look black. I mean, it's dark brown, but unless it's talking about the pre-fired one version of it before it becomes burned, and I don't know exactly, but that's what I'm saying is that these words are what people cling to with that. Now, that's not enough, though. A lot of people need more than that, and so then they'll go to, where is it? Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. We know who Solomon was. Everybody knows who Solomon was. Solomon was the man. He was the one of the greatest kings ever. I mean, one of the wisest kings, for crying out loud. Right here, he's talking to a Jerusalem woman, and he says, I am black, but comely. O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar. Now, for those who don't know what the tents of Kedar look like, tents of Kedar, they're black. So not only is he telling you he's black, he's describing himself, comparing himself to something that people were aware of back then, and that was that these tents from Kedar were black. They were made of black material. So he was a black man. There's no questioning that King Solomon was black. King Solomon was definitely not white. It says it right here. Boom. All day long. Here I am reading through this thing, trying to understand this thing. I'm following a lot of people, white people, black people, all different types of people. I'm listening to people read and learn and interpret the scripture and teach and tell people what it says. And I agree. It does say Solomon was black. Well, if Solomon was black, his daddy had to be black. And who was his daddy? His daddy was King David. Let me see. Am I pulling this up correctly? 12, yeah. So in one of the last streams I had, David, we talked about him and how he was a very confident and very brave young man. I mean, he trusted God to the fullest. Well, here in 1 Samuel 16, verse 12, it says, and he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, a withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Now, I'm not sure if you caught that, but we're going to Google another word. What is ruddy? Well, how is ruddy used to describe people? Yeah. What does ruddy mean? Let's just do that. All right. Well, there you go. People. People. Ruddy looks like this dude, basically. That's what that's trying to tell you. That's what that is. It's redhead. It's red hair. Ruddy is used to describe something that is reddish, like the color of red hair, tomatoes, or a friend's cheeks on a cold winter's day. Ruddy is commonly used to describe someone's complexion. In this case, it describes a healthy reddish glow. That's not something you see in a dark-skinned person. That's something you see in a light-skinned person. A light-skinned person with red hair. Now, there are red-haired black people. So yeah, you could be, could be, could be, could be you guys, could be them. I mean, I'm not exactly sold on that yet. However, I am sold on Solomon being black. Like, I'm definitely sold on Solomon being black. I mean, it came straight out of his mouth. He's talking to this woman. He said he's black. However, I'm not sold on King David being black. Now, I don't know what color King David's line was necessarily. I don't know what they were before him. Race wasn't an issue back then. It wasn't something that was important. Just the same as it's not something that's important today. If it were, it would be in the Bible. It wouldn't be something that people need to be taught in an education system about. I mean, you wouldn't know anything about it if it wasn't for your teachers. If we're being truthful and honest with ourselves. I mean, isn't that what this is all about? Seeking the truth? Well, the truth is you wouldn't know anything about race had someone not taught it to you. Okay? But you do. You know about race now. All right, let me pull that back up. I don't want to miss anything. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm caught up with everybody. Ruddy is red. Absolutely. Adam is ruddy. Yep. So the point that I'm trying to make with that is that David was red-haired. He was a red-headed person. All right. I've already gotten rid of that page, so I can't show you again. But you know what I'm saying. He was red-haired. Now, his son was black. Clearly, we could see that. The Bible's not lying to us. His son was black. But his son now doesn't come from a whole nother country or a whole nother continent. Let's just understand that if David came from Jackson, Mississippi, for example, and had a black son, that black son doesn't necessarily come from Africa anymore. I mean at all or ever. I mean, he comes from wherever David comes from. Now we know through the timeline that I'm building here, which is not necessarily all necessary for this topic here, but this timeline that I'm building here, we know that Solomon came from David, and we also know that Jesus came from David. Now, whether Jesus wasn't described to have red hair and rosy red cheeks. He was described to have burned bronze skin and white hair and blue fire flame eyes. I mean, it could be yellow flame. I'm not exactly sure on that. But the point is that the people of today will cling to that belief that they're from Africa. I mean, it's the motherland. I mean, everything's great and better over there. Well, it doesn't seem that way, or people wouldn't be leaving it, just being honest. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that any place is good or bad or great from here or wherever. The point of that is that as we get through this timeline in building it, and as you're reading through scripture, going from chapter 1 of Genesis all the way to chapter 22 of Revelation, your timeline, you should be building a mental timeline in your head of these events and as they're taking place. What ends up happening, now I'm going to pull this up. I am going to pull this back up so you guys can see this. All right, move that out of the way. All right, refresh that. Oh, here it is. Okay, so pull that back up. I'm going to hide that so it doesn't distract from it. Calm down over there. All right. So what was I? All right, there's my pen. Okay, so what you'll notice in this timeline is I wrote right here 1,000 years missing. And then right here, I have 4,000 to 5,000. And then I have from 5,000 to 500. Now, the reason I started this timeline and ended it with 5,500 is because, remember, as I was explaining earlier in another video about the Bible being a children's book, it's the condensed version of what really took place. When you read Jasher, you find out that God told, or at least the angel told Adam that, hey, chill out. Everything's going to be okay. God's not going to do anything until into this world until 5.5 days is over. In 5.5 days is 5,500 years. That's how long 5.5 days is. Now, the odd thing is the reason I wrote this here, when I built this thing the first 12 times, I kept missing this. I couldn't find what belonged here. It's not, I wasn't finding it in the Bible too much necessarily, like, other than I knew there was supposed to be a kingdom here, but I couldn't find it. It wasn't in our history books. Okay. This 1,000 years just disappeared somehow, but it was weird because I was finding it in maps. And that's one thing I appreciate about my father is he loved to learn history and study this type of stuff. And I like to study this type of stuff. And I didn't necessarily get it from him, but I did get my appreciation for history from him. I guess you could say. I guess I did get an appreciation from him, but I didn't. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. The point is that this 1,000 years in the 12 timelines that I kept building, I couldn't figure out what belonged here. I didn't know what it was. It was there. It was like it was right in front of me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was just not there. But I knew that somehow something happened around this time period right here. In this time period, I was equaling to this time period right here. All right. Now, what ends up happening is after the flood, there it is. After the flood, this big, thick red line, people start aging a lot faster. But they're growing shorter and shorter with each generation. Okay. Now, again, this is simply one bloodline. If we were to, which I will eventually, because I'm not going to get rid of this, but I'm just going to keep adding to this. I will eventually go back to the beginning, and I'll do one of these of Cain. We can do one. Hell, we could do one with Ishmael. We could do one. Well, we could do Ham, and we can do Japheth. But I'm telling you right now, Japheth and Ham are almost impossible to do. I mean, anybody that has told you on a video, I don't care if they're a scholar. I don't care if they've been to 28 colleges with 400 master's degrees in this. If anyone online or in the world, period, is telling you that they know 100% these two lines, they are lying, because it's not really possible. What you can do is you can get relatively close, and I'm going to tell you why that is. If you'll notice, all of these names, there's something that they all have in common. All of these names have a similar theme in common. What is that theme? What's that commonality? Let's see. All right. Okay, so I'm going to look at chat. I'm not sure if I'm delayed or not on chat, so if I'm missing your questions, and remember, I have to look up to see you guys up there. If I'm missing your questions, I apologize. That's right. The point that I'm trying to make with that last comment, though, um, is that all these people are male. These names and the real record, the real genealogy record of all of these people was done away with in the year 70 AD. Now, this is where, when I was building my timeline before the understanding of Tartaria and the connection between Tartaria and the millennial kingdom, was that every timeline I built in 70 AD, when the temple is destroyed, I have to guess the next 1,000 years, because no one exists. There's no record. There's no DNA record. There's no birth records. There's none of that. The only potential people that could know, I guess what I'm saying is, is that the only people that technically could know are the so-called 13 families. Now, the reason these families are important, the reason you have people like the Rothschilds, is because these people here existed, or they lived, or some of them, their ancestry lived during this time period right here. During this missing 1,000 years, during the millennial kingdom, there were people who were not necessarily good people living through that time period. And that makes sense to me. And I understand that. And the reason I can say that so clearly and confidently is because I have kids. If anyone has ever had kids, they understand what ruling with a rod of iron means. It wouldn't be necessary for Jesus to rule over us or people with a rod of iron if we were good people doing what we were supposed to be doing, obeying the rules and doing what he says and obeying his authority. But you had unruly people. You had people living during the millennial kingdom, which is where it was weird when I was building these timelines initially. When I got to the 70 AD part, which ends up being roughly around the same year in this timeline as 4000. So the year 4000 and 70 AD are essentially the same. Essentially. So you have 70 AD. It's as I couldn't decide between 70 and 140. I think you guys will see that eventually once we continue this, as we continue this. But what I'm saying is that 70 AD is the same year as this 4000 right here. When the temple is destroyed, this bloodline and everybody tied to it it didn't just disappear and go away, but the records for it did. Not only those records, but the other 11 plus 2 tribes, the 2 that were banished, Ephraim and Manasseh, which are very important to understand. Because I say we, but if we don't know, you should know that Ephraim, even though banished, was made one stick with Judah. They were made as one. What this means is that it doesn't matter if you're from Ephraim or from Judah. They are the same. They, according to God, are the same. Now, you can go to the hospital and ask a doctor to verify this. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't know. I don't care what they say either about it. What I'm telling you is what the Bible says. That's all I'm going to tell you is what the Bible says about this. And so the Bible says that they are made, they're two different people that were brought together as one. Well, the same is true for Manasseh. All the tribes were brought together. I mean, they were all brought together. They were all made as one. They were made as one stick. They were all made as they're all brought in. But they were already by blood tied or linked to Abraham anyways. Even though that was where he dies. They were all linked to him anyways. Had Abraham not existed, there wouldn't be 12 tribes, there wouldn't be 14 tribes, there wouldn't be 13 tribes, there wouldn't be 10, there wouldn't be any tribes. None. All the tribes would be gone. Because if all nations didn't come from Abraham, that makes that book wrong. It makes God a liar. And like I said in one of my first streams, I can't find an infallible word in this book, though I've tried. Now, it does seem like it has contradictions. The problem is, at the moment of those contradictions only are contradictions because they don't align with the history you've been taught already. Those last 12 years, plus your college degrees and all that, have told you something different to believe. So when you read it in the Bible, it don't make sense. It doesn't align with what you've been taught. You have to ignore that part and move past it to understand this part. The point that I wanted everybody to take away from that and to understand with this entire thing is that when we get down into all of these names here, you notice I'm using black and a lot thinner lines here because these aren't necessarily birthdays. These aren't necessarily birth dates. They're not necessarily deaths either. What these indicate, and you get these numbers, and any scholar that's done a timeline, they've got these numbers from the same source. You have two books, Kings, First Kings and Second Kings, and then you have another book called Chronicles. Not Chronicles, I'm sorry. Numbers. And then you have a book called Judges. Okay? Point is, you have several books that we've got to go through, and we got to fit all those books into this little space right here. And they do. Every one of them fit in here. Because if you notice, these lines that are right through here are way longer than these little lines in here. And what ends up happening is all they're telling you throughout the rest of it is how long these people ruled over Israel or different parts of Israel. Now, Israel ends up getting divided when Jeroboam and Rehoboam end up coming into the... All right, so when Solomon dies, Rehoboam, he ends up taking his place, but Jeroboam thought he should take his place because he was the oldest or something like that. I mean, there was an argument there between these two brothers. This is when the Israelites divided into two kingdoms. They took 10 tribes to the north with them, and then the other two tribes were Benjamin and Judah. And anyway, so they divided. They divide into two kingdoms. One in the north and one in the south. You have Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Now, these are kings that came from the line of David, the same line that that Jacob comes from. You know, of course, he came from Jacob's line. And it doesn't matter necessarily that they didn't get along, that they went this way, or that they went that way, or that they went that way. They all come from Abraham. Like I said, they all come from Abraham. And then as we fill in the rest of these through kings and numbers, and I'll have to keep zooming in on this thing and writing really small, or I have to redo this whole thing probably, or erase all this. I probably have to erase all that, and then well, let's not do that. I don't want to mess that up. Yeah. All right. So like I said, what'll end up happening is we'll start filling these lines in. And what'll happen is that these lines here will end right here, and we will be called up to the year 70 AD. Now, what ends up happening after this 70 AD part is you have 1,000 years. And in that 1,000 years, you had the kingdom of Tartaria. Why they called it that, I don't know. I wasn't here. None of us were. Just like none of us were here when any of these people were alive. None of us were here when any of these people were alive. And none of us were here when these people were alive. Now, all these people that we're pointing out right here are the people that built the pyramids. They built all these mega structures and stuff. It's why you have some places with really big doors and whatnot. On average, if you have 36 feet, and this is your dude, and he's sitting here at 36 feet tall, we're down here at 6 foot tall. Well, the issue is that Adam was this tall, not Shem, and not his descendants, not Arphaxad. Yeah, here we are. Not Arphaxad, Selah, Eber, Peleg, Rus, Erod, Ner, or Terah. None of those people were 36 feet tall, but they were, on average, 15 to 20 feet tall. That was their average height. The next generation after Terah ends up, you get Abraham. Abraham and them end up being around 6 feet tall. That ends up being the standard height from then on out. I mean, we're all 6 feet tall. But what happens is through the bloodline of Ham, you do get some people that are pretty tall. They're not going to be 36 feet tall. They're more like 13 or 14 feet tall. You know them as the brothers, Goliath and his 4 brothers. There's 5 brothers, but they had Nephilim DNA in them. Now, what's important to understand here in the timeline, in the genealogy of things, is who Noah's wife was. His wife was Naamah. I'm not sure how to spell that. It's Naamah. All right. Well, it's important to know. We'll just call her Nay. So Noah's wife, Naamah, comes from the line of Cain. Cain has a son. That son has a son. Then that's Cain's grandson. Well, I have to pull it back up because I don't memorize their names. They're not important anymore. But what ends up happening is Cain's son and his grandson, they kill Cain. So Cain is dead. That's in Jasher. Jasher, I'm going to always refer to Jasher when it's important to do so because of who this man right here is. If this dude hadn't mentioned the book Jasher, I wouldn't even know it existed. Why wouldn't I care about what that book says if one of the greatest generals in the Israel lineage has ever existed? If he believes enough in that book to mention it, I'm going to read it. And so I read it, and what it talks about in there, and one thing it talks about is Cain's line. And Cain's line It tells you that he's killed. So that right there gets rid of all the conspiracy theories about Cain's line or Cain still being alive today or whatever reason. Now, he could be alive. He could have came back if God chose for him to do that. I don't know. I've never witnessed that or seen that or heard of that. But that's neither here nor there because it's not in the Bible. It's not in there. None of that is. So what we know is that Cain's line dies, but there's 7 of them, 7 generations of Cain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7th generation of Cain. Well, actually, if we go back up to 6, the 6th generation, there's a guy named Lamech, and it's Lamech of Cain, not Lamech of Methuselah. It's a different Lamech. It's the Lamech of Cain. This is Cain. And Cain had a daughter, and her name was Naamah. And I think there's 2 A's. So her name was Naamah, and she ended up, the way it describes her is, if I could imagine any celebrity today that kind of somewhat matches this description of Naamah, I would have to go with like Beyonce or something like that. I mean, she's just kind of a lovely woman, but she was kind of described to have darker skin, and she could sing really well. She liked to play a harp and stuff, and she liked the big dudes, like the really big dudes. She liked them, and she was a naughty girl for a little while. That book is kind of it's kind of graphic, and like I said in one of my other streams, dang, I noticed I've done said that too many times. So as I said previously, we will go through the book Lamech of Cain. It's an interesting book, but it's only important to go through if you really want to know about Noah's wife. The reason why we have all these weird blendings of different racial origins, I guess, is because of who Noah's wife was. From Naamah and Noah, we don't just have Shem, we have Ham, and then we have Japheth. Now, as you read through Scripture, you notice something similar, that these people are very similar to what we call white people today. European, colonizers, or whatever you want to call them. They kind of are described like white people. It's interesting. Ham we know he had a son named Cush. Let's erase all that. Ham had a son named Cush, and Cush was described to be dark, kind of like the soil. I mean, he was dark. He was black. Well, from Cush, you get Ethiopia, by the way, or Ethiopians. It's interesting because the Ethiopians, you hear a lot of people will say that they're linked to the Jews in some way. Now, the reason this is possible is because at some point, where is it? Where are we? Do we need to go backwards? Yeah. The reason that's possible is that at some point, Esau does go down here into the south, and he mixes his seed with the people of the south. He mixes his people with the Ethiopians and several other people from Ham's line. The Amorites, the Hivites, and people like that. He was blending with all these people. What ends up happening is the male seed enters into the female Ethiopian, and what ends up happening is whatever color, black, white, it don't matter, whatever color they are, doesn't matter, they come from that male seed. And that male seed come from Esau. That Esau seed come from Abraham. At the end of the day, it don't matter who you come from. We all come from Abraham. We'll get to that when we get into our anti-Semitic talk, when we're talking about the fake Jews and the fact that they're not the biblical Jews. The reality is they are, to a degree, just the same as a lot of us are, to a degree. The issue is that they're linking their bloodline through the female side of their family, which will bring them back around as well. I mean, it all ends up bringing you back to Abraham, no matter which direction you go. The only issue is that by them taking their names, their Jewish name from their mother, what ends up happening is this line right here of Shem is not the progenitor. What ends up happening is they'll say that this is the progenitor. So now what ends up happening, if you're black, you must come from that. When in reality, you probably come from this guy who, before he dies, you came from that guy, which today all of us did. We all did because of who this guy was. Esau not only dominated the entire north and conquered all the people of Japheth and Ham, what he did through his line, though, his specific direct line, like, so Esau had a son, and then that son had another son. Now, one of them might have had two sons, and then one of them might have had three sons, while this one only had two sons. The problem is we now no longer know it just keeps going. Just keeps going. As it just keeps going, now you don't know exactly which one you come from necessarily, but it does come up to here, and then it brings you up to here. Now, the problem is it links them to Esau. Not only does it link them to Esau, whenever it hits Esau, what they'll do with their lineage is they'll do this. They'll go, we're at Esau? I don't like that. Well, ancestrally, my mother's name was, let's just call her Greta. I don't know why I'm saying that name, but let's just say that was her name. Well, now they're going to go, we're going to not stop there. We're going to go this way. And so now they're going this way. Now their lineage is taking them a different direction. What ends up happening is that lineage ends up leading them to Japheth, and then through Japheth to Naamah, and then from Naamah to Cain. Hence the term for white devil. That's where that comes from. It's the reverse of everything. I mean, everything's backwards. But that's where that comes from, that whole terminology of that phrase and thought. That's why I erased it, because it's not that relevant anymore. So as we go through these lines, these bloodlines, what ends up happening, a lot of people trace their lines through their mothers. And as you trace your line through your mothers, it ends up taking you a different route. It's easier to streamline it when you look at the fathers. Now, interesting thing here is that regardless of what I'm saying about that, these names here, this is all one like a singular line. All of this is a singular line. What you didn't know is that Shem had multiple children. They weren't all where was I? They weren't all Arphaxad. He had several children. Shem had several. I think he had like 3 or 4. King David had like 18 kids, I think, or something like that. I can't remember. And I don't even want to try to count Solomon's kids. Solomon had a lot of them as well. The point that I'm making is that if Solomon or King David or anybody was alive, they had a brother or a cousin or anything like that. It makes it almost impossible to trace all this without the temple. With the temple being destroyed and the actual lineage, what you end up getting is stuff like this. What ends up happening is you go from documenting births and deaths to now you're just documenting, well, how long that guy ruled. I mean, how long did he rule? How long did he live? When did he die exactly? I'm not exactly sure, but we know he ruled next. All right. So if the Jehoshaphat rules until the year 3102, and then as we get in, and then we're reading through Kings, and we get to the part where it says, okay, and his rule ended, and then his son, who so picks up the reins. Well, then we would just pick up at 302 to, let's say he does 40 years, so then it would be 3142 is simply how that would work. And as you can see, 40 is a lot shorter time span than 400. Oh, by the way, I meant to tell y'all that earlier. This group of people, they lived on average about 400 years old. The next group of people, they live, actually, I made that wrong. So this group of people, they lived to be about 450 years old on average. These people lived on average 250 years old. These people on average lived to be about 120 to 150 years old. But all these people, they live like us. I mean, they have normal lifespans. Some of these guys live to be 90. Some of them live to be 100, 120. Another interesting story that to take away from that, and I'm just going to throw this in here, is that when Shem was around, let's bring that out. When Shem was around, he actually kills, or actually helps kill. Let me rephrase that. Actually, I'm telling a story here. So Esau is actually the one that does it. So Esau kills Nimrod. And the reason I was bringing Shem up is because what happens with Shem is, once Nimrod was the grandson of Ham, by the way. He was Cush's son. So Nimrod ends up ruling the world for a short period of time. And he gets killed by Esau. And when he gets killed by Esau, Shem and his boys, they cut him up into 12 pieces, and they scatter him out, and they send them to all the kings and other kings of the world. This was basically, Shem was not playing any games. Look, God has destroyed this whole world with a flood. The last thing I want y'all to do is to go out into the world and redo the same BS that caused God's wrath to destroy this whole world. All right, let me see. Let's see. I hope I didn't lose anybody. I see Wendy might be having to leave. No? Or she's just saying it's been a good one. All right, cool. Oh, hey, Jenny, welcome, man. I didn't see you in here. All right, so anyways, yeah, I don't want to lose my train of thought, guys, but I do want to catch up, and I don't want to lose anybody, so please don't leave out on me yet. I'm almost done with this. So we have, anyways, like I was saying, they cut him up into like several pieces and scattered them around. These fellas would be whooping our tails today if they were alive, because these are your greatest ancestors right here. These people in black right here. These guys would have been whooping your tails, but these would have been considered like gods. I mean, if you could imagine a 15 and 20 foot tall group of people walking around you, I mean, you would revere them as gods too. I mean, you wouldn't know anything other than what they tell you, but regardless, they weren't playing any games. After the flood, they were serious. Obey God's rules. Well, what happens when Nimrod comes around, they stop doing that. And the only difference in Ham and Japheth, even though one is in the north and one is in the south, what ends up happening, the only real major difference is that Japheth is really secretive. They keep all their stuff zipped. I mean, they're not talking about anything. But it makes sense when you All right, let me get back out of here. It makes sense when you get through your timeline and you get to this missing 1,000 years, why some of these royal bloodlines and some of these families will claim like ancient dynasties that seem to go beyond this 1,500 year period, into this 1,000 year period. It's because some people, even some of us watching this video today, your ancestry dates back to this 1,000 year period. The issue is that Jesus ruled with a rod of iron. In that 1,000 years, he wasn't letting people do DNA tests. He wasn't going to let people just go out there and worry about blood and genetics and all of that. He wasn't trying to let you worry about that because that's not important to him. It's not important to God, and it shouldn't be important to you. But yet it is. And so, but it's only that way because you were taught about it. Had you not been taught about it, you would be under the same mindset as the people that lived during that 1,000 year period. Problem is, people want to believe that this 1,000 year period was a period of peace, that nothing bad was happening, that everybody was good. Well, that doesn't make any sense when you think about and consider the fact that why would he need a rod of iron to rule over you if you're already good and doing everything you're supposed to be doing anyways? It doesn't make sense that they would say to have to do it that way. So all I'm saying is that some of the people alive today were able to keep up with these records. Now, I don't believe that even the secret families and the societies and all that, I don't even believe that they were able to recover any of the records that were destroyed in the temple in the year 70 AD. What I believe is that they, at the very least, know that they belonged, or that their family was alive during this 1,000 year period that we're not taught about in our history, in our school books. This 1,000 years, they know they were alive during that time period. They can't say for certain what line, Shem, Ham, Japheth, that they come from. All they could tell you is they look similar. Okay. Do what we want. They look very similar to Japheth, the way that his line is described. And so they just kind of go with that. It makes them feel good and makes them feel better for doing that, I guess. I mean, you'd have to ask them that, I guess. The point is that that's deep down, that's where all that comes from, is all I'm trying to tell you, is all I'm trying to get you to understand with that, is that deep down, there are some people that know that their line does date back to this 1,000 year period. But with no one out there in the world really keeping up with these birth records, it's hearsay. It's all it is. They could be accurate. I mean, they really could know exactly what king from the line of David that they come from, or the line of Jacob. They might know exactly who they are. But it's hearsay to you and me. And the reason I say it's hearsay to you and me, because it doesn't matter. Even if I were so 1,000,000% sure that I come from Issachar. Now, I'm kind of guessing, thinking maybe that's who I come from. But, I mean, let's say I was positive, right? If I said I was positive, how? How am I positive? How did I get that positivity? Like, where did that positivity come from? I would have had to keep up with that record. Now, just because my daddy or my granddaddy tells me I come from that dude, don't mean I come from that dude. They could be lying. Just like I could be lying to my kid if I were to tell him we come from a people we don't really come from. But the point is I'm trying to make is that it's hearsay. But regardless if it's true or not, it's not in this book that we read and study called the Bible. What is in here is what's important. These names and their ages and all that was only important. All of this was important to show you the consequences of sin. The consequences of sin is death, period. For the wage of sin is death. These people, whether they lived 100 years or 950 years, they all died. And all of them died except for Enoch down there in blue. He didn't die because he got taken to heaven. He didn't have to die. But all these other people did die. King David even died. King Solomon died. Rehoboam died. Joshua, Moses, Jacob, Isaac, Joseph, Eber, Ishmael, Shem, they all die. Any one of us will die. Just like in the 1,000 years that we're missing here in this genealogy timeline, people still died during that time period. But not all people were dying. Some people had glorified bodies, which is why in some of those videos that we all watched with Jason, Jack, John Levi, My Lunch Break, and so on, and JT, and conspiracy, understanding conspiracy with Paul, Madeline over at Leaving Babylon, even Shelley over at There's No Place Like Home. Even they are showing you images and pictures and black and white photographs. Well, you have this person who's really tall standing beside a regular person. What these people right here are genetically are just like these people over here. I mean, their genetics are very similar to these people. They're in their glorified bodies. Their glorified bodies would have been, in my mind, I'm thinking they would be more like the people from before the flood, the ones that were most closely, like I guess impure all the way down to a godly level, other than their inherent inability to not sin. I mean, quit sinning, and I guess we gain glorified bodies. We come, everything just becomes better. Point I'm trying to make is that during that 1,000 year period, you did have variations of people in height and size. I could imagine that if you were one of these tall people standing next to one of these little people, you'd feel bad for them, like, come on, man, quit watching porn, quit smoking your cigarettes. That's looking at me, by the way. We shouldn't do that. The things that we do that hurt each other and hurt ourselves. All right. So anyways, like I said, for those that have been following this channel and keeping up with me and what I'm trying to do here, this is ADHD brain talking and thinking. This whole process is ADHD brain thinking. And what I mean by that is I've read all this stuff and I've been through this so much that I kind of will forget certain things to mention. So if I repeat myself, I apologize. This is part of the process. But what I'm wanting to point out with that is that during this whole podcast, this entire series, this whole channel's focus is to help you understand what words are important to cling to and what words aren't. And if you haven't figured out by now, none of these words in this book, none of these words in this book here. Oh, I'm over here. None of these books are going to talk about this stuff. They're not going to talk about race. It's just not important. It's an ignorant topic to even, to discuss. It's an ignorant thing to cling to. I don't know why people feel oppressed outside of what they were taught in school. Outside of that, there's no reason for oppression. Now, I wasn't just picking on the black community. This goes equally equally towards the white community. You can watch. I mean, I hate that argument. The whole, oh, white people were slaves too. Yeah, yeah, you were. Some of them were. All people were slaves at some point. The Israelites went into slavery 6 years after they left out of out. I can't remember who it was. It doesn't matter. The point is, they were free. They were slaves. They became free, and then 6 years of freedom. After 6 years of freedom, they become slaves again. I mean, they just keep becoming slaves to other places, other people. Now, the truth is, well, there's a whole thing to that, and we'll go into that. That's for another day. But the point is, about the white community is you'll hear like, well, the white Irish or the Irish were slaves and this and that. Well, they're thinking about the time period that, say, that William Wallace lived in, or the Braveheart guy was living in during that time period. That's what they're referring to, is that time period. Well, the reality is that Ephraim and Manasseh, that's where these people come from. Actually, Manasseh ended up over here in the Americas, and Ephraim ended up over in like Ireland and England and in that area. We were taught in school as the Vikings, and then you had other groups like Manasseh, but they ended up splitting, and their line ended up becoming like a part of one of their children from that line was named Barbers or Barbaros or something like that, which is where we get the term barbarians from. All that is that these were like names of these people. They were calling them these things to kind of like belittle them in a way, but they're the Barbers, and the Barbers were Manasseh. They ended up over the Caucasus Mountains and then down over into the Americas, or something to that effect. But we'll get into that with the whole timeline stuff, because it'll show us that in the Bible. It'll show us that where these lands were that these people went to. When you can see the entirety of the world, as I was showing you guys earlier in that little cartoon image of the earth that I drew, there's a lot of world that has not been explored by anyone currently living today, or within the last 100 or 300 or 400 years. There's a lot of world that's been uninhabited by us. Doesn't mean that they're not inhabited by other people, other civilizations, whether they're advanced, not advanced. None of that's really relevant, because it doesn't change anything for us. Because at the end of this time period, at the end of this whole 1,000 year, 5,500 year period, at the end of this right here, we end up, this whole world that we live in, this whole thing goes away. I don't care how it happens. We can discuss that, though. A lot of people will, and they're going to say, well, it gets burned up. No, it gets rolled up like a scroll. I can tell you what, it don't matter but how it gets destroyed. It's no longer here. This world is gone, or goes away, and then God builds us a new one. I have no reason to believe there will be this much water, or will it even be necessary in our new world. Nor do I know what type of world. I don't know what the physical element of that world is going to be. No one does. There's no way anyone could know, because no one's ever seen it or experienced it. Now, past, present, or future, no one yet has been there. But it is on the horizon, and it is coming next. It is something that's going to happen real soon. So like I said, the whole point of all of this is to show you guys that, realistically speaking, when it comes down to race and who we are, we all bleed the same color. We all come from the same seed, and at the end of the day, we're all different shades of wheat. The fact that when I'm dead and gone, and say 50 to 30, 40 years has passed since I've been dead. If you're looking at me right now without me telling you, you're assuming that I'm white. Now, we all know, or at least a lot of people know, that I was adopted, and my parents that adopted me are white. They were white. And they raised me well. I mean, I can't complain necessarily. I'm just saying that doesn't make me white, though. What makes me well, that doesn't. What makes me white is the government. That's what makes me white. Ignorant thoughts. That's what makes me white. The point I'm making is that biologically, my father's a Mexican, and his father was a Mexican, and so on, all the way back to the Aztecs. No one in our family dates themselves or goes to Europe. We don't go to Spain. We don't go that way. We go to from Mexico, from America to Mexico to the Aztec, Mayas, Inca, Aztecs. That's where my line, they say they come from. I don't know how they could know that unless the story of the Mayan Incas is true. Of course, the Maya, Inca, Aztecs, their lore, historical lore, is that sometime around the early 1500s, they crawled up out of the earth from the long sleep, whatever that means. You take that however you want to take it. It sounds to me like they were dead at one point, came back to life, rose up out of the ground. And oddly, that's what they say happened. And that's, at least that's what they were explaining to the so-called colonizers as they were intermingling with each other in the early years of the 1500s, when you had different people from scattered throughout the world trying to reclaim as much of this leftover behind millennial kingdom as they could. And then essentially that's what led to a lot of those initial wars, like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and all those wars. It's all every one of these wars. It was about claiming certain parts of this leftover kingdom. Basically, it's what all that was. So the point I'm making is that my son now has blonde hair and blue eyes. Well, kind of. It's not blonde anymore, but it was when he was a baby, or younger, anyways. However, if him and his girlfriend get married and she has blonde hair and blue eyes, they have blonde hair and blue eyes. They are going to have blonde hair and blue eyed kids. And the point that I'm trying to make with that is that when I'm dead and gone 50 or so years later, it's not a far stretch to believe and understand that someone is going to try to convince them that they come from Europe somehow. And there will be people within other communities, minority communities, looking at them, accusing them of crimes that belong to potentially people from another place, a whole nother bloodline, all because they look a certain way. Just the same as, anybody that's born today can't rightfully say they know exactly who they come from past a couple hundred years. And only a certain few families kept up with their records or started taking records of their lines after the 1526, after the loosing of Satan. There was not, most people weren't worried about that. That had become a thing until the census was created, but the census didn't become a thing either until the United States was reformed, the mystery Babylon, so to speak. Anyways, that's pretty much going to wrap up everything that I had to say on this, on the truth about race. I hope you guys have enjoyed this this message and this little series here, and hopefully you guys learned something, or at least took something away from it that was positive. Let's see if I can bring this over here where I can see this chat. Make sure I've caught up with everything. Oh, wow. So I see we got Alex Jones in the house. All right, or at least he was. We got Genealogies is here. Let's see. Wendy. All right. Yes, he was a giant, taller than 13 feet. Oh yes, yeah, that we were talking when we were talking about David and Goliath. Shoot, we're still slaves in this stupid debt system. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we are. I mean, just because we're not locked up behind closed doors doesn't mean we're not still slaves. I mean, we're not only slaves of the mind, we're slaves in physical form. I mean, there's a whole lot of world for us to be trying to explore that we don't even get the opportunity to. But either way, anyways, oh, so Samson, his line is Samson from. Um, that's a good question. Don't let me lie to you. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll pull that up. Ah, never mind. That's right. He was from the tribe of Dan. And interesting, the tribe of Dan, when you look into the tribe of Dan, they they really favor what we were taught about the so-called Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians, I kind of have this I guess, growing suspicion that Dan was technically the Phoenicians. They just call them the Phoenicians for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. I'm just kind of going through these comments, making sure I didn't miss anything too important. I don't want to leave anybody hanging if they were really expecting me to answer a question necessarily. I see John left. I'm glad he was able to make it. Yep, that's right. Esau, red and hairy. Yeah, he was. He was red and hairy all over. Yet his brother was a common man, which insinuates that he was the opposite in some way. Paul Bunyan and the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk. You got me thinking. Absolutely, that's right. All right. All good, all good. Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, so that's like I said, that's gonna wrap this up for the night. I hope that you guys have enjoyed it, and I hope that you will um, take another look at this thing when next time race enters your brain, and you start thinking in your mind in some way that that this is gonna lead you to some superiority. It's not. Your race will not matter in today's terms and day and age. A person said this best, and I don't want to misquote him, but it was Andrew Tate, and he just basically said a black billionaire meets a white billionaire, but neither one of them are worried about each other's race. Okay, so the point that I'm making with all of this is that the whole race debate doesn't make sense. It's not only does it make sense, it's an ignorant argument, it's an ignorant thing to cling to. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to love and like other people from other races. Like, that's not really what that's saying. I mean, to each their own when it comes to personal preferences and whatnot. All I'm saying with that is that all right. All I'm trying to point out with that is that at the end of the day, race is not a reflection of who you are inside. What is a reflection of who you are inside is how you walk and how you talk. Do you walk the talk, and do you walk with Jesus? At the end of the day, if you're following the words from this book, it's going to guide you in the right way. It's not going to guide you in the wrong ways. The only reason people think it can is because they're convinced that it's been tried before. But the reality is there's never been a time period in human history where every person obeyed the word of God fully. If there was, there wouldn't have been a reason for Jesus to rule over people for 1,000 years with a rod of iron. It just wouldn't have been a necessary thing to do. Anyways, like I said, we're wrapping this up. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. You guys are amazing and wonderful. I love you guys, and you guys take care. Well, we'll see you again on Monday, 9 p.m. We'll start again. Hopefully, I'll have all my video and sound and everything fixed, and we won't have this jumping around live issue like I had earlier today. Anyways, love you guys. Y'all take care. Have a good weekend, and yeah, that's it. See you.